Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HealthyXSundays podcast, where we bring to you the most important and actionable information in the nutrition and fitness space. I'm your host, Kunal Jain, also known as Veg Diet Coach, and joining me today as co host is Dave from Mind Muscle Project. Today, our guest is Mr. Yogesh Dixit. We had him on the HealthyXSundays podcast earlier, where we had a very nice discussion about how he came into the fitness space, his journey from IT, as well as what is the philosophy behind his company, Eat Right Monk, where he coaches people how to life reset programs and helps them regain their health. So today, the topic of discussion is we are doing it for the first time on this podcast webinar, and the topic for discussion today is how to unlock the power of sleep. So it's going to be a presentation and an interactive session. And I'll request Yogesh to share his screen now.
Sure. Thanks, Kunal. Thanks, Dave. It was really nice to get connected on this platform one more time. My pleasure. Thanks for the invite. And like what we have been discussing, how we are approaching today's session is a mix of a lot of interactive stuff plus some slides, anchor slides to go through and to basically have some of the stuff register in your mind. So let me have this opportunity to share my screen. Just give me a moment and I'll be with you. Let me take this in the PowerPoint mode. Yeah, okay, cool. And I'm sharing my screen now. Okay, here you go. So I hope you're able to see Kunal and Dev, what I'm presenting. Right. So like what Kunal has already alluded to, the topic for today's discussion is unlocking the power of sleep. And why sleep, right? I mean, I think all of us are in either health, fitness, nutrition kind of a space. What's the need of talking about sleep? I mean, so and we are going to be doing a deep dive. I'll have Dev and Kunal also chime in between whenever it required, right? Because their knowledge in this field also would be vital to get an understanding about. A quick rundown about myself, Yogesh Dixit. I mean, I worked with IT for almost 25 plus years, and then I took a plunge. I've started Eat Right Monk, and in between, I've did a bit of certificates in terms of sports nutrition, exercise science, and all of that. Sports nutritionist, right? I mean, so and then it all happened in a very organic manner. I probably have spoken about that in one of the earlier discussions, but essentially it started with a lot of passion, and I've been running this all by myself for last 5 years. I'm also a bit of fasting proponent. I would say I like to basically, if you will, biohack on that particular front. I mean, fasting to a certain extent. The trainees on my program, they also are inclined to be doing some of the extended fast as such, while it is not a mandate. But I do believe in fasting as a lifestyle approach a lot. And what I do is basically I'm into a lifestyle coaching using low carb as an intervention, and I'm also a habit and mindset coach. I would say not just nutrition and fitness, but essentially I work with people's mindset to get them on track. They to basically bring them on this journey of lifestyle changes. So, and this is with only one intent, which is of improving metabolic health as such. So that's the primary intent with which Eat Right Monk came into existence, and it's still going on. I'll take a pause and then move on to the next one. And then I think if Kunal and Dave has anything to chime on, right? I mean, they can. So this is for our viewers, right? I mean, so most of you would be acquainted with either of them or maybe all of them, the pictures of whom are grayed out. And they're like very well-known sets of people, and there is no mean I'm trying to be demeaning or discounting what they're doing in their own space. But what happens is this session is not about them. This session is not about the kind of knowledge which is being prevalent and which is being sprayed with these kinds of influencers, which many times is kind of misleading. I think many of us, including maybe my I mean this thing, I mean host today, we must have come across a lot of let's say misconceptions and misleading kind of information through some of these people as such. So this is, while this is not about these sets of influencers, there's a picture in the middle, right? I mean, which is not grayed out. She's Dr. Manoshi Bhattacharya, and you probably may not be knowing this person. There's not a lot that is available on social media, on internet about this person. She's an AFMC graduate, a medical doctor. She worked with Indian Navy. She's practicing, medicine now after being retired from the Navy as such. But I think couple of videos which are available, and those are like just mind blowing kind of videos where she talks about the food history. She talks about importance of fasting and how in general food as a habit got changed, or let's say a few millennials, right? I mean, and that is something that is worth understanding. What I mean, the pandemic of different kind of, let's say, diseases that we are on, including diabetes and this thing, obesity and whatnot. A lot of that is due to the fact that there is a huge accessibility, unwarranted accessibility to the food. And a lot of that can be basically understood through that 1 or 2 hours of videos, I mean, couple of videos that she has. So this session is basically to create, I mean, a lot of us, including, let's say, Kunal, they a lot of us in this particular space are trying to create the scientifically backed awareness, right? And my urge, sincere urge to everyone is like, while there is a lot of content that these influencers are floating, most of them, many of them, which are being seen here in grayed out fashion, but that does not mean that that is the most authentic or that is the most accurate, scientifically backed kind of information. So my sincere urge is, you should be, as let's say, sane population should always validate and assess that information that you are getting exposed to. And then once you understand the science behind that, then only start following that particular aspect as such. So okay. So I hope this is an interesting start, right? I mean, Kunal and Dev, because otherwise, I think setting the context, I think, is something very, very important. So I thought of like just giving you everyone a view. So, sorry, I mean, here I think what we want to understand is what's happening around us, right? I mean, as population, what kind of issues that we are facing, what kind of ailments, what kind of different kind of disorders that we are facing. And while we are here, let's say, even if I ask this question to maybe Kunal and Dev, what kind of, I mean, what kind of people or elements that we see around us? Can you throw some light on that? I mean, maybe your trainees and your clients, whatever that you, or maybe in general people around us, even our relatives and close family. What kind of ailments or disorders that we usually come across? Anything that you would like to reflect on?
Dave, you want to go?
Yeah, I think he's on mute, but yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah,
not a, I mean, it's a no-brainer, but yeah, I mean, it is basically a lot of obesity around us, right? I mean, overweight people,
Fatty liver,
right.
pre-diabetes, diabetes, yeah, I mean,
fatty
absolutely.
liver, PCOS, diabetes,
Correct. Yeah.
hypertension. That's another one.
Yeah, absolutely. So thyroid disorders, PCOD, you mentioned, fatty liver, gut issues, right? I mean, even to the extent of Alzheimer's, cardiovascular issues, cancers, and whatnot, right? So
Yeah,
if you see, I mean, it is not something that is uncommon, unusual these days. So, and I would like to churn in a lot of numbers. I used to be a numbers guy when I used to be with corporates. I like to present a lot of these things with sheer facts and data. So, and a lot of these that I'm going to be presenting today are backed by some studies which are available in the public domain. So this is not something kind of cooked up or made up kind of a thing.
mhm,
So what happens is these are being called as chronic diseases, metabolic disorders, or even non-communicable diseases like NCDs. So and there's a very surprising fact over here, or shocking fact rather, that 60% of the deaths are related to NCDs, right? I mean, and this is India that we are talking about. And then very high chance. I mean, there can be some viewers who are in their 20s or 30s. They might not be fitting into any one of these things. Fortunately, they probably are away from, far from some of these things, but that does not mean that they may not acquire, because the kind of lifestyle that all of us are live, right? I mean, there are fair chances, unfortunately, that many of these people may attract some of these diseases in coming years, right? I mean, maybe a decade or so. And the key reason for most of these things is insulin resistance. So now the question would be why we are talking about insulin resistance when we are supposed to be talking about sleep. And then we are getting over there, but I think the important thing that all of us as population should be aware of is this particular state, which is absolutely to be avoided getting into, which is called as insulin resistance, which is let's say for the sake of simplicity, which is abundance of insulin in the body, and which is essentially causing a lot of hormonal disorder or imbalance as such. So now I think we'll jump on to, I mean, you probably would have, even Kunal and Dave, you probably would have a question like how insulin resistance and why we are talking about insulin resistance when the topic is
Yeah,
about sleep, right?
right, right.
So
How come it relates to
yeah,
sleep?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then anything that comes to your mind, let's say, what are the factors which affect NCDs or insulin resistance, just in case, I mean.
Yeah, definitely it's lifestyle. It's your
Yeah,
nutrition, or rather
yeah,
the bad nutrition which you're eating.
yeah,
It includes are you resting your body? Are you exercising? Are you sedentary? All these
yeah,
factors can lead up to insulin resistance.
absolutely. Absolutely. So let's go through that one by one, right? And this is called as, let's say, tripod of health, where nutrition is definitely that plays one of the biggest roles over here. So insulin resistance can be formed due to let's say non-nutritious access to non-nutritious foods, or maybe a lot of reliance on non-nutritious foods, and which are like a lot of excess refined carbs, not just carbs, but refined carbs, right? I mean, fried foods, those kinds of things, seed oils, sugars in various forms, even fruits, right? I mean, also to do with our lifestyle, like what Kunal was mentioning. While probably people do eat well to a certain extent, their frequency of eating and the timing of food can be a lot wavered, and that can essentially be that can fall into the non-nutritious foods or habits kind of an this thing, I mean, pillar, and which is one major cause of, let's say, anyone attracting insulin resistance or the cascading effect of that, which are like number of different kind of ailments. So that's the first, I would say, tripod of health, good health, and we have to be, that's how consuming not a lot of nutritious foods as such. The second is essentially unstructured workouts, and that word unstructured means a lot because many people feel like that they're doing workouts, right? Or maybe they are doing exercises. If workout is a heavy word, exercises. And the exercise can be
Right.
as simple as I go for walk. Like मैं 20 minutes walk करता हूँ, and maybe otherwise people do say that I use Apple Watch or whatever watch for some fancy gadgets, and then I walk, let's say, 5,000 steps in a day. And so there is nothing which is basically happening in a structured way during the daytime. I mean, entire day people are walking a few steps here and there, and that's how they basically feel that they're doing something good. Even if they are hitting the gym, they probably are not doing various things in the most appropriate way, in a structured way, right? So the other thing is about consistency, right? I mean, so people may not be absolutely consistent, which is the most important thing while doing the workouts. While let's say the workload or maybe the intensity of workout can be low if for whatever reasons, but otherwise consistency plays one of the most important roles. So here I'm talking about population who's like beyond 40, right? I mean, 40, 50, that kind of a population I'm referring to. Otherwise also, I think consistency matters a lot. The third one is about the muscle workouts, right? I mean, so like I said, many of us are doing, let's say, only walking, or a lot of emphasis is on, let's say, running and doing some of these sports. So if I go to badminton, I go for, let's say, table tennis, and people consider those as, let's say, some kind of an sports activity, some kind of an exercise kind activity, right? I mean, so that counts, but that is not necessarily the muscle centric activity, and that does not help in terms of attaining appropriate metabolic health as such. So this is the second one, the tripod of health. The third one, and which is the most underrated, and this is what the topic of today's discussion, right? So inadequate sleep. And there are different, I would say, aspects attached to sleep as such, because it is not it cannot be counted in or maybe assessed in just one dimension, and we'll talk about that as we progress. But that's how, I mean, let's say if we want to be insulin sensitive, if you don't want to be in the insulin resistive kind of a mode, then all these three things play important roles: be it nutritious food, be it structured workouts, and the last is about adequate sleep, healthy sleep as such. And we'll now start talking about what that sleep is and how that matters, right? I mean, so okay. So any questions thus far, Kunal, Dev?
Yeah, I mean, to the meal frequency and timing, can you elaborate a
Yeah.
little bit on that, please?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, see, I mean, this is something that I can relate to myself, right? I mean, or many other people. I used to have like 2 or 3 meals a day kind of a pattern I followed till my mid 20s to maybe early 30s. And then because I was fallen for some very wrong advices I talked about, I showed some pictures. So some of these influencers, some of the doctors, they always talk about thoda thoda khao, like in 5 6 7 baar khao, right? I mean, so basically you should space out your food. Don't eat large meals in a day. I mean, space your foods across, let's say, 6 7 different meals as such. So that essentially is something that works against the principle of insulin, or maybe maintaining the let's say optimal insulin balance and rest of the things, right? I mean, so meal frequency has to be like maybe only 2 or 3 times. I mean, this is again for people. I'm not talking about bodybuilders. I'm not talking about people who are like having an extreme weight training regime. I'm not counting them. I'm talking about general population. I'm also talking about people who are kind of metabolically compromised already. For them, if they're increasing their meal frequency, it is asking for disaster, right? So because it is having a direct correlation with insulin that is being secreted in the body, and if the insulin secretion is happening a lot often, that essentially can lead to, or one of the primary driving factors for insulin resistance. Timing again, I mean, the many people they basically have dinners typically very late in the night. I mean, maybe, I mean, after 10 11 whatever, right? And they directly go to the sleep. I did some of these mistakes back then, right? I mean, maybe 20 years back. And then I faced a hell lot of issues with GERD kind of things, right? I mean, the acid reflux and things like that. So uh, for that, I think the food timing as well as the frequency matters a lot. I mean, we have to be, and we are going to be covering some of these aspects later, but early dinner, having, let's say, kind of a set routine for your lunch, dinner, and maybe any other meal that you're having. That means you're keeping your body or maybe your brain aware that it requires meal at a particular time, right? I mean, and I'm feeding my body, my body with the meals at a certain time in the day as such. So that way, I think we don't unnecessarily feel hungry at weird hours. We are training our body in terms of having nutrition coming in at a particular time as such, and that basically so discipline, consistency. We spoke about, I think, the monk part, right? I mean, eat right monk. I think that's something that I basically emphasize a lot on. So I hope that answers the question.
So
Um,
I have a question.
yeah, please.
You mentioned about the three pillars.
Yeah,
So out of these three, which would you say is the most important, or what would
interesting
the
one.
highest
Interesting one.
priority be?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my belief, this is what I've learned from the masters, right? I mean, and then there can be some, let's say, we can have a debate if required. I mean, we can have some different views, perspectives, but nutrition plays the most significant role, like around 60 70% is probably nutrition. Rest maybe 15 20% could be workouts, and another 10 20%. But while we studied that as a theory, I would like to emphasize there are phases in life where sleep can completely bulldoze everything else. So even because people are not able to sleep at all for whatever reasons, be it stress, be it their work schedule, be it whatever, and then that inadequate sleep basically takes over precedence and I mean, that can be the root cause for all the other elements that they are facing. I mean, while they're doing great in terms of nutrition, while they're doing a bit okayish on, let's say, their workouts, but if they're not getting enough sleep or the most appropriate kind of a sleep, everything can go haywire. So I think these three things will have some context attached, but in let's say a regular, I mean, in the usual set routine, nutritious food is the one that plays a significant role as such, at least 60-70%.
Mr. Navneet
Yeah.
Kumar Gupta has a question. He says that
Oh, yeah.
is insulin secreted in a fixed amount irrespective of the meal size? Is there a relation to the amount of food and the insulin which is secreted by the pancreas?
I think it varies. It varies, but again, I don't have the exact numbers. But what I'm trying to say is, our job as humans, right? I mean, we have to be actually avoiding getting into a situation even the pancreas is secreting insulin very frequently. I think that is something which is absolutely to be avoided. And how much the insulin is being secreted probably becomes because if you are allowing that pancreas to secrete insulin only few times in a day, maybe 3 times in a day, I think that can essentially help in terms of gaining amazing metabolic health. So I think we need not, I mean, I may not be having the exact numbers as of now, but otherwise also we need not worry about that part. What we should be worrying about is how frequently I'm unnecessarily troubling my pancreas to secrete the insulin. And if I keep it to the bare minimal, I think I will be slowly getting towards attaining a better metabolic health as such.
So I think what he is trying to, Mr. Navneet is trying to ask is that irrespective of the kind of meal you have, like you have a small meal and you have a heavy meal, is the insulin secretion the same? So the answer I think would be obviously not. Depending on the meal, if you're having more of a
Large meal.
carbohydrate, yeah, large carbohydrate rich meal, obviously more glucose will be generated and more insulin will also be simultaneously produced. So
Right.
it depends. It surely depends on the meal size as well and what you have in
Absolutely.
the meal.
Absolutely. I mean, more the carbohydrate rich meal, obviously the amount of glucose production is on the higher side, the amount of insulin that is being secreted on the higher side. If you're having a lot of fat-based meal, ketogenic kind of a meal, obviously the need for glucose, I mean, there won't be much for glucose production. Subsequently, the insulin production is going to be absolutely minimal, right? So, I mean, yeah, obviously all of that would depend. But what I'm trying to say is the hack is to eat less and to have more of a low carb kind of eat less as in less frequently. Let me correct myself. Less frequent and low carb meals obviously will help you get to more insulin sensitive kind of an state. Yeah. Okay. Can we go to the next one?
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is something I was having a chat, right? I mean, with Kunal also, and what comes to our mind, right? I mean, when we see this picture, sleep like an instant response could be all of us know. I think many of us could be parents as well. So the first thing that we come across is a baby, right? I mean, sleep like a baby, and this is just on the humor side, right? So I was having a discussion. I mean, I usually have these discussions with most of my trainees slash clients, right? So there is this mom that I was talking to, and one of the conversations, one of our routine calls, she was really happy that her sleep cycles were improved, and then I basically, she's a mom, right? I mean, you can so I basically talk. I was while I was talking to her, I said, "Ki, so you slept like a baby," and she was like almost revolted, saying, "No, absolutely not," because her baby was like have created kind of an havoc, right? I mean, when she was like really small. I mean, that her daughter, right? I mean, was a small baby, and she never used to sleep properly. So she has some very weird and very almost scary kind of memories about sleep when it comes to babies, right? So I think what happened. Why I'm giving this reference over here is like we have been gathering a lot of these misconceptions, right? I mean, over a period of time, and those are being normalized also. Like, I mean, we always talk about, I mean, sleeping like a baby, as in sleeping in a very good sense, very healthy sense, very, let's say, deep sense, but which is actually not the case as such, right? So, okay. So, any other questions that you have? Otherwise, we can go to the next one.
Now makes sense. People
Yeah.
think that just sleeping is enough, but there is more to sleep. The restfulness of
Yeah.
sleep, which we'll talk about, I think, later.
Right. Right. Okay. Cool. So now I think next few bits we'll talk about we'll talk about different kind of stats which are available, right? And these are again from public domain, and this is having a lot of authenticity to it. So I'll basically go in a chronological manner. This is the oldest data that is available. I mean, whatever that I'm presenting today. So oldest as in whatever that I'm presenting. So if you see that this is really an eye opener. So what it talks about is people who have slept, let's say, fewer than 6 hours a night. The tendency for them to let's say develop some or the other cardiovascular event later is almost double. So if let's say for people who are sleeping more than 6 hours, it is probably around 8 to 9%. At the same time, people who are sleeping lesser than 6 hours, it can go up to, let's say, even 19%, right? So it's a huge, I would say, insight in terms of how and why the sleep is the most important, or one of the most important things when it comes to, let's say, protecting our heart as such. And this is from American Heart Association. This was a 2017 study, and this has to be, I mean, many of these stats, I think we should be really looking at in a very, I would say, diligent manner as such. So that's one. Let's look at what's happening. So any event that we know of which happened in last 3 4 years, I think all of us know about COVID, right? And then we experienced a lot of things which have changed post COVID, like 2020, 2019, 2020 as such. So some stats from that particular era, like 3 or 4 years back, when the world almost toppled, went upside down in terms of what we used to do, what we are doing now. And I think one of the most impacts, one of the most deep impacts that, let's say, mankind had was on their sleep. So one such this thing, I mean, data point is almost 70% of adults report that they're experiencing some or the other issues with sleep. This is a post-pandemic, right? And then I think we can relate to ourselves also, or we can relate it to people around us, right? I mean, who probably are complaining about some or the other issues that they're facing with their sleep. And the reasons could be a lot different, and we are aware of that. I mean, the binging, right, on on OTT platforms, and a number of different things, I think, has increased dramatically in the last 3 4 years. So people's sleeping pattern got changed. uh, Earlier, I think people used to binge only on weekends because people don't have to catch up a train or maybe drive to an office. People have started adopting a different kind of lifestyle. Every day used to be like, I mean, on OTT or whatever other things. They used to wake up late, and that's how I think the sleep patterns got changed. The issues associated with sleep, I mean, dramatically increased as such over in last 3 4 years. And I'm sure that the kind of clients or trainees that you get, Dev and Kunal, I think you probably would be having some of these discussions with them. What happened during, let's say, last few years? And my conversation starts many times with this, like, this has been happening for last few years. And then when we go deeper into the root causes, it somehow is related to COVID pandemic and change in working style and things like that. So that's one thing. The next is about, and then which is the further worst, right? I mean, so a lot of these people, 60+% adults, they're experiencing impact on their memories when they're not sleeping well. The next subsequent days, next day, I think they see a dramatic change in their memory, or probably the memory is worsened as such. And again, it's a no-brainer. I mean, a lot of these things we are anyways talking about and in subsequent slides. But yeah, the last one is about almost 60 plus 65+% of the people, they are at least waking up once or twice, even more. I mean, if you see the Indian context, this is a global pattern, let's say 3 4 years back, but I'm jumping into an Indian context as well in a bit. But waking up in the night has been increased a lot because of pandemic, and because of that, many people face daytime sleepiness, right? And then, which is again affecting a number of things, maybe at workplace, maybe at their studies, maybe even people working at home and things like that. So there is a huge impact on the productivity as well of people. And it is not just productivity, it is not just that. I think a lot of other things are involved over there. We'll talk about that. So let's see how India sleeps, right? I mean, anything that you have uh, you're coming across in terms of sleep patterns, anything that you would like to reflect before we jump onto this slide? Just in case.
Yeah, I believe India is like a mixed bag of different kind of professions. So most of the people in the service industry, especially the IT
Yeah.
folks, they're supposed to work in
Yeah.
shifts, which are night shifts, or they call it the graveyard shift. So these people
Yeah.
definitely have very poor sleep patterns, and plus they have a lot of stress, long working hours.
Yeah.
So that's one
Right.
category of people in India who actually have to, because of professional reasons, they have to kind of have bad sleep patterns. But then there are other people who choose to not take care of the sleep. They're not aware of the problems which bad sleep
Correct.
can bring. So
Very true.
I believe those are the people who should
Yeah.
actually be just
So,
educating themselves, and this is the session for them.
yeah. No, absolutely, you hit the nail on the head, right? So many times it's ignorance. Many times it's basically sleep is like almost neglected in terms of what we are supposed to be doing in a day, and how important, like Dave has had asked that question. People do emphasize a lot, and that's how I think we see tons and tons of reels and shorts about nutrition, about workouts, very little on sleep, because no one wants to give any kind of an this thing importance towards sleep as such. You rightly picked that up. Let's see how India sleeps, right? I mean, so the first thing is about we are not refreshed. I mean, let's say if you are following patterns that we have seen earlier, similar kind of patterns where and what you just mentioned, Kunal, a generic representation, right? So sleep is being ignored, discounted, not being looked at, right? So almost 46% of the people are not refreshed. This is again this year's study, a very latest kind of a study. So, and this has a very direct impact on number of things. One is productivity, but a lot of other things on mood in terms of interpersonal relations. We'll talk about that. I mean, there is it does not it's not like, I mean, we possibly just scratch the surface when it comes to sleep, right? But there is a lot deeper impact that happens. We are going to be talking about that, touching upon that in a bit. So yeah, I mean, almost 90% of the people, they're waking up at 1 or 2 times a night, right? I mean, and I saw it is more than this, at least thrice I could get to see. The third one is more, I would say, shocking. It is about women, and let's say 50% of or more, I think, they're waking up 3 or more times in a night as such. And you can imagine the kind of impact on the female hormonal this thing state as such. So this has to be looked upon in a very, very, I would say, diligent manner. The reasons behind this, why many people are so ignorant that they drink a lot of water before, I mean, while they go to the bed, and that's how they have to be getting, I mean, answering the nature's call, right? I mean, why quite frequently. So I think there's definitely a lack of awareness, what Kunal mentioned, right? And it is at multiple levels. It is absolutely at multiple levels. And we need to be like addressing that as such. So, okay, let's go to the next one. Yeah. So let's talk about, and if anyone wants to chime in, but how do you feel? I mean, let's talk about a feeling when, let's say, you are sleep deprived. You couldn't get a sleep, let's say, entire night or maybe few hours in the night. How do you feel the next day? What happens, or in the night itself or the next day? How do you feel? I mean, let's talk about the feelings, and then we'll talk about the science. Anything that you would like to reflect on this?
Definitely, if you don't get a good night's sleep, you'll wake up with a brain fog. You will not feel active. You'll feel lethargic, and you will sort of feel
Absolutely.
maybe I should put in a few more hours of sleep, but that is not going to help, in my opinion.
Yeah, correct. Exactly.
And one thing I have noticed is that night sleep cannot be replicated in the morning, right?
100%.
You can, yeah, that is something I observed. You can sleep 8 hours at night, 8 hours in the morning. It's not the same thing.
Exactly. And I think we know each other for long, but I know for sure that during your engineering studies, you must have done something like this. And I think that age is prime age when we can, I've done that, right? I mean, all of us, Kunal must have done that, right? I mean, I've also done that at my work until my 30s, right? Or maybe even later also. But increasingly, as we age, we get to understand this is absolutely not sustainable. This is not the kind of approach that can work, right, at multiple levels. And we have already seen when, let's say, people are getting fewer hours of sleep, how much of impact it can have even on cardiovascular health. It should not be like looked upon as just, let's say, lack of sleep for maybe a night, couple of nights. It can have a very deep impact even on the cardiovascular health. So let's look at the science. One is about the feeling. So the next slide is very interesting. I've tried clubbing a couple of things. One is about feelings, and the next thing is about the hormones that are associated with that. But before that, I mean, this is what we just discussed, that we are trying to get sleep in the night, we are not getting that, and what happens the next day, be it at work, be it at anywhere else, but we basically catch up on a cup of coffee or whatever just to stay awake, right? I mean, so that's the kind of an irony that we come across most of the people in their day-to-day life. And I think the culprits could be whatever. I mean, it could be overuse of gadgets and things like that. We'll talk about melatonin, we'll talk about gadgets in a bit, but I mean, to how to control that, I mean, how to basically start getting better sleep. A few, maybe couple of slides, and I think Kunal and Dev can have a lot to add to that. We'll talk about that in a bit, but this is the slide that I was referring to, the feelings and the hormonal imbalance and the metabolic disorders. So I think, I mean, both Kunal and they've alluded to some of these feelings like being stressed, being anxious, being depressed, and this is happening because your cortisol levels start rising up when when you are sleep deprived. So it's very common. See, we know what happens in terms of our feelings. We know that we don't feel well at all when we are not slept, but the amount of the to the extent, I mean, it essentially causes damage to our hormonal system as well as our metabolic health is, I mean, it probably is not being measured or not being understood. So we need to start getting, I mean, clubbing these two things, my feelings and what exactly is happening in my body. That's very important. If we can get educated on these fronts, I think that can help, right? I mean, high blood glucose levels, high blood pressure. So, and every single time when I'm basically coaching a trainee, a client, a mentee, when we see fasting blood glucose is behaving really irrationally, the first question that is being asked to that person is, have you slept well? And more often than not, I think the answer is, I mean, yeah, they didn't get good sleep as such. So more than what they've ate the last night or maybe during the previous day, it can also be a function of whether they got good sleep or not. And because they're not getting good sleep, their blood glucose levels essentially are elevated. So to that extent, and because I think the cortisol is increasing, insulin is increasing, that is essentially increasing because of the kind of sleep deprived state that you are in, right? So it is not just, let's say, to be ignored as, I mean, I'm not getting good sleep as such. It has got multiple, I mean, it is acting at multiple different levels in the body as such. We know this word, right? I mean, being hangry, like, I mean, the combination of hungry plus angry. So and that also can lead to maybe poor span of attention. It can, so this is the productivity aspect that I've been talking about. I mean, typically for working professionals, could be even for students, right? So a lot of people can get affected because of lack of sleep. And like what Dave was mentioning, I mean, that 8 hours of sleep, I mean, if you want to catch up on whatever that is being missed out in the night during the daytime, that is absolutely, that does not work. So that essentially gets into that vicious cycle कि मैंने कल रात को नहीं सोया है, सोया हूँ, and then I'm basically catching up on sleep during the day today. Again, I'm not going to be getting good sleep in the night because I've slept in the day as such. So I think a lot of these things can essentially, let's say, interfere with our hormonal system. So this is something which is increased ghrelin, and that essentially will lead to more hunger, right? I mean, a lot of hunger as such. So, so these are the ones which get elevated. We'll talk about a couple of those hormones which get lowered as such. So, leptin basically is reduced, and because of that, cravings, and I mean, essentially, you start feeling less satiated. Even after having food, you start feeling less satiated, and that's how the cravings can increase. The other thing is mood swings. We know, I mean, this definitely happens, and you now combine this with, let's say, people like, I mean, who are in a very stressful job. People, I mean, even ladies who are basically in their menses during their monthly cycles. So if you combine these things with a sleep deprived kind of a state, that can lead to more damaging kind of a situation for that individual. And that's where I think we need to be making sure that our sleep is being protected every single night as such. And we have to be like really looking at it as closely as nutrition or workouts. That's very important as such. I think I hope this covers in detail. Any questions on this, just in case, about sleep deprivation state? Or
So,
otherwise, yeah.
yeah, one question that came to my mind is, suppose somebody is working like
Mhm.
a night shift, right?
Yeah.
Night shift kind of job. Then what does that person do? Is it totally hopeless, or is there anything that person can do?
No, very, very valid question. See, I haven't, sorry, I mean, I haven't got a lot of opportunity to work with that kind of an individual. Not exactly the graveyard shift, but there are people who are working like really late. I mean, most of the people that I work with are from IT. Their day ends at probably 12 or 1, right? I mean, many a time. So, I think, that's the kind of mindset or maybe habit change that I work on with people. Not hopeless. I mean, I also work with an individual who was a crew member for, let's say, United Airlines. And he used to fly JFK, Delhi JFK twice in a week. And we could get amazing handle in terms of his from making him from pre-diabetic to non-diabetic, dropping the weight, right? I mean, during those 3 months to maybe 6 odd kgs. So anyways, he was not like really very overweight as such. But what I'm trying to say is there can be some method to the madness. Obviously, someone who's working in the graveyard shift, I mean, there's nothing that can be done, and I probably do not have a first-hand experience about that. But I think we can always then have the other two levers, which are food and exercise, to be going on in a very appropriate manner. And I think if something is not, I mean, something is not happening just because of their profession, I may not have the answer what exactly can be done towards that. But I think they should be then making sure that they're not disturbing their system by having some unwarranted foods or at unwarranted time. Or maybe, I mean, even the graveyard shift, I think they should try and avoid having food during those, let's say, in the middle of the night or things like that. And I mean, so a lot of these things, when people are traveling, right? I mean, they're catching up on, let's say, red eye flights in the US, or their long haul flights. I always tell them not to have food in the middle of the night. You basically have food before boarding the flight. Aram say, I mean, you'll get amazing kind of a food, in fact, at the airports. And then you should not, you should try and catch up on sleep during your, let's say, I mean, flight as such. So yeah, I mean, but otherwise, I think people who are working in late night shifts, I think they need to be making sure that they are at least not troubling their system by having some very unwarranted foods, a lot of coffees in the middle of the night and things like that. Yeah. Okay.
I just want to add
So
one thing to Dev's
yeah, please.
question, that it might sound impractical, but if you are in a night shift, you should actually try to get out of that job. It's not going to serve you well in the long run. I mean, if you have an option, better just ask, your boss to put you in a normal shift. It might sound impractical, but I think people should be a bit vocal about their health if they have an option.
Absolutely. And this is not impractical. I mean, I'm completely with you on this, Kunal, because most of the people that I work with, they are in their 40s plus, right? I mean, many of them are in their in the IT kind of a job. And to be very honest, I mean, this is not a part of discussion, but since you brought this up, many of them, they may not even need to be doing that kind of an stressful job. They do really do well to do kind of sets of people from that kind of families. And their health is already, let's say, compromised. They being diabetic, they being hypertensive, they being underwent procedures like angioplasty, and still they are doing something which is, for the lack of better words, insane. They're literally, I mean, going to the bed a lot later. They are not able to handle the kind of stress. So, I mean, what you're seeing definitely makes sense in terms of what is my priority. If health
Yeah,
is my priority, then I had to be looking at something else, which is basically supporting, improving my health, and not vice versa. Yeah,
yeah,
but
and
everything has a context. So there is probably no best answer to what Dave has asked. But yeah, I think what Kunal mentioned definitely has a merit when it comes to that kind of a situation.
And I have one more question. I see that you are wearing blue light filter glasses, right?
Yeah.
Is this something to do with the sleep, or is it just general health?
No, I mean, yeah, that was how it was sold to me, and I like that because I think it's anti-glare, and I think one of the advanced kind of glasses, so that's how I opted for that. But that's a very good, I would say, reflection, Dave, and I was about to be covering that. That blue light can again lead to a lot of damaging kind of a situation, right? I mean, so we need to be again making sure that the use of gadgets towards the end of the night, I think, has to reduce. That's one thing. But again, you should be doing every single thing. There are a lot of gadgetry that is available to protect some of these things. I think you can do that. I mean, one thing while we are on sleep, right? I mean, one thing that I've got to know, one of the couple that I've trained, they are in California, very young couple, 30s May. And this guy has told me that how he improved his health. And I somehow forgot to tell him, because I usually tell some of these hacks to people. He basically start wearing जो night shades use होते हैं airline में, right? I mean, so they went somewhere and he got one. So he started using it at his home and he started getting amazing kind of a sleep, right? I mean, so a lot of these hacks, if required, if necessary, I think we have to be basically embracing that. There's nothing wrong in that. Absolutely. Yeah. So, okay. Thanks for that, Dave and Kunal. I think quite insightful. So let's talk about very quickly about what is we were talking about sleep for a while, but what is ideal sleep, right? And those are the three perspectives. I think if you know of anything else, you can add. But otherwise, first is the duration. We spoke about that. But is it the only thing? No, I mean, it is not. At least 7 to 8 hours, and you might get to hear 6 to 7 to 8 to 9, whatever. 7 to 8 is a sweet spot, I would say. But while I say that, I would also like to reflect that some of the times it may mean different things for different people. I mean, we know about, let's say, some politicians who are sleeping only for 4 hours, and they might be. I mean, I'm not contesting that, not doubting that. But I also was a very, I would say, light sleeper till, let's say, 3 4 years back before pandemic, right? I mean, so I was absolutely fine with five hours of sleep in the night, and I still used to get up 5 o'clock in the morning. I used to still do my routines and things like that. But I can set some context, and again, I'm not saying because it has happened with me, that's the truth. It's not. I'm just sharing my experience over here. So my workload used to be more of a cardio workload, as in my workouts used to be more of cardio centric kind of workouts till, let's say, 6 7 years back. I started doing at least a bit of gymming in last 6 7 years, and I could see there is a direct relation between my sleep call. I started needing more sleep and more deep sleep when I started doing a bit of let's say, weight training kind of activities. When I was doing cardio, my sleep cycles were like very short, and I used to be like up and running a lot early in the morning. I never required a lot of sleep when I was not doing weight training. I mean, I don't know whether that's a valid relation, but I found this is happening, and that's how I insist people have to be getting good amount of sleep, because some of the other strengthening workouts, I basically get them done on this particular Eat Right Monk programs, right? So that's one reflection. But I think ideally 7 to 8 hours. Quality is very important. So more deep and REM sleep. So many times it happens that 7 to 8 hours, but people are probably in between. They get up and then they basically start scrolling their phones and things like that. So while they feel that, ha, maine 11 baje I went to bed and then probably got up at 6, but they were probably up and let's say going through their phone for maybe an hour, couple of hours in between. That does not absolutely make any sense as such. Or they're probably just turning and tossing themselves around in the middle of the night. So that is not quality of sleep, right? So more deep and red eye movement kind of a sleep is and less light is something which is basically a good quality sleep as such. And the third and most important thing is the tuning in with the circadian rhythm. That's very, and essentially circadian rhythm is nothing but the body clock. So the most appropriate time of sleep is between 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., right? I mean, if you can actually hit that, that is going to be like, that can help a lot. But otherwise, I mean, if not 10, let's say at least 11 and back, I mean, till then, maybe 6, 7, whatever, to complete 7 or 8 hours of sleep. But I think catching up between 10 to 2 is very important, because that's the time when that's the most productive sleep, I would say. If you look at, I don't want to get any religion or faith over here, but just to basically set the context or maybe give a reference, Hindu culture, right? I mean, we know about the Brahma Muhurta and things like that. So 4 4:30 is the get up time, wake up time that is being endorsed over there. is being recommended over there. And then you basically get up a lot early in the morning. And then for that, I think you should definitely be going to the bed at maybe 9:30, whatever, to get that 6-7 hours of sleep. So, and there are obviously a lot of merits to follow this circadian rhythm. If you look at maybe even 150 years back when electricity was not there, we must have, most of us, right? I mean, because it was a lot of agricultural centric kind of an world everywhere, right? I mean, so the kind of schedule that people have followed before even industrialization, right? Maybe 200 years back, but was like, I mean, a lot like this, going to bed a lot early, getting up a lot early, and everything. I mean, I'm anyways having the context attached in the last slide, but basically circadian rhythm, right? I mean, so that is absolutely very important. And I know people would always agree and debate, no, sorry, not agree, would always debate about this, like I cannot go to sleep at 10, but I think it's not that difficult. Well, I mean, I'm not saying 10 has to be 10, I mean, whatever extent you can, but what happens is people's, I mean, their day does not end. First, because of work, and then there's a lot of catch up that is required to happen on what for WhatsApp, on social media, on whatever else, right? I mean, to catch up on some OTT show and things like that. So they never ends till, let's say, maybe 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the night, and that's where I think a lot of issues that we start facing. I think every individual has to start getting an understanding about what is the priority, because there are like tens and hundreds and thousands of things to do, I mean, in terms of catching up on. But does that make any, is it helping any bit in terms of improving my health? So if it is not improving my health, I should not be even going over there, right? I mean, that is what something that all of us has to subscribe, that kind of a view. But this is me, a little extremist kind of a view, but yeah, I'll keep it over there. So this is again about the circadian rhythm. If you see what I was referring to, maybe 10:30 to maybe around 5 is the kind of sleep time that is mentioned over here. But nonetheless, I think we should be making sure the large chunk of that 10 to 2 kind of 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. has to be productively utilized for sleep. That's very important as such. Okay, so yeah, why ideal sleep, right? I mean, and I think we covered in bits, but otherwise, let me quickly go through that. There are at least 3 different, I would say, layers attached to it. So one is obviously to do with the psychology. And we talked about the mood swings, we talked about the emotions and feelings. So restoring all of that is of utmost importance. And we have seen, I mean, after pandemic, typically a lot of people who are coming across a lot of psychological issues. And I'm not saying everything is getting attributed to lack of sleep or sleep deprivation, but it is playing a good amount of role over there. So I think we need to be making sure that we are protecting our psychological health. A lot of these things that we discussed, or maybe might have discussed about the physiological and metabolic aspects. So see why we need sleep, the ideal sleep, right? I mean, not just any kind of sleep. We are talking about ideal sleep. And our, I mean, we know that, let's say, while we are sleeping, I think a lot of different things happen, right? I mean, we know that our muscles repair. I mean, a lot of restoration work happens, but it's not just the muscles, but a lot of organs and systems and tissues, right? I mean, so every single thing, barring, let's say, a few organs, maybe brain and heart, and maybe a few other organs, be it lungs, who anyways have to work 24/7. But otherwise, if we can have an early dinner, we can basically at least give some rest to our digestive system, right? So many of the organs and systems and tissues, right? I mean, in the body will require that kind of a rest to restore, to revive, right? I mean, that's where for the better physiological and metabolic health, ideal sleep is required. A lot of different functions in the body, I think, regulating those, be it hormones we looked at, be it, let's say, other metabolic aspects. It's absolutely required to get that ideal sleep as such. And we define what ideal sleep is. It's not just any sleep as such. Yeah, a lot of repairing, restructuring happens. We spoke about that. And the last but not the least is about the neurological health. I mean, I think I alluded to the fact that our brain requires a lot of clearing, right? I mean, of waste, a lot of, I mean, millions of thoughts, right? I mean, a lot of different data which are being basically consumed throughout the day. And I think with the advent of social media, I mean, many of us are like doing some endless scrolling. You can imagine the kind of waste that is being prepared. I mean, being produced in the manufactured in the brain as such. It has to be purged every single night. It has to be purged. It has to be vented out. It has to be like getting cleared out of the system. Otherwise, I mean, that can create havoc again, right? I mean, in the brain and the body. So that's where sleep is very important. We know, I mean, one of the ways to torture, right? I mean, I don't want to venture into that space, but let's say we get to see it in the novels. We get to see like espionage kind of novels, or maybe those kind of spy movies. What happens when, let's say, a spy is being tortured by the enemy country, right? I mean, they're not allowed to sleep and things like that. So it's for the same reason that their psychological health, their let's say neurological health has to be damaged. So this is one of the most important things to basically clear the waste in the brain as such. Our memory, obviously, we spoke about that in the earlier slides, that can get impacted if we are not getting ideal sleep as such. So the holistic health, right? I mean, that is very important, and sleep definitely scores. So when, let's say, again, to mention what I've already mentioned, when you're doing great in terms of your food and your workouts, I think, and you're doing overall well, I think you may not feel the need of having an absolute great amount of sleep or ideal kind of sleep. But when the other two things are not working properly, I think you then can start getting a very, very intense feeling of how a lot of things are being damaged because you're not sleeping well as such. So sleep has to be looked upon that in that particular manner as such. So yeah, I mean, some of the things that we have discussed up until now, and I think both Kunal and Dev, you alluded to that. We'll summarize this real quick for our audience over here. The don'ts and do's. First, talk about the don'ts. So this is a no-brainer, right? I mean, we discussed about this. High carb, anyways, I mean, we should not be having, and late night dinners. I think this is something that is to be, because we have seen a clear relation between high carb foods, insulin resistance, and how it can impact the other hormones and the sleep as such. So both things are to be these things are to be avoided. We looked at circadian rhythm, which also talks about having an early dinner, having an early end of the day, right? I mean, so that's where the early night, I mean, early dinners or suppers are recommended very highly. Avoid caffeine, right? I mean, again, this is something that we get to hear everywhere on social media, on reels and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, this is true. I've experienced that a few times when I've had very strong coffees late in the evening. I couldn't sleep, right? And while I talk about caffeine and it is not impacting me, I might have mentioned it in some forums, but there is a context attached. I'm referring to a coffee which is outside and which is very strong coffee. I can still have very, very mild coffee which is made at home, right? I mean, and I can have it late in the night and I can still go to the sleep. But because I've done a good amount of, let's say, workout, I've eaten well, and I'm in general protecting my sleep throughout the week. I think that small amount of coffee, instant coffee, let's say half a spoon or something, doesn't impact me. But otherwise, the general guideline is essentially not to have caffeine, and which is like a one espresso, two espresso kind of strong coffee after 4 p.m. as such. Alcohol, again, I mean, everyone knows it. It interferes with the sleep. It interferes with a lot of. I mean, it makes you dehydrated. That's how I think the sleep can get impacted in both ways. So while I think a lot of these things are, people are aware of that, I'm not too sure they want to follow, they are inclined to be following. But this is a good set of information. Limit screen time, I think that is something that going back to what Dave has asked. So yeah, I mean, blue line is an absolute worst enemy, I would say. And then a lot of gadgets that we get exposed to, phones, pads, tabs, right? I mean, TVs, even a lot of nights, I mean, lights, right? I mean, around us. So I mean, I'll talk about a few sleep experts in a couple of minutes, but otherwise, if you watch some of those videos, and again, I think they must have tweeted about it a lot, when Kunal might have, about a lot of different lights which are entering in the room, a lot of, let's say, different conditions, and we don't even, in the Indian context, we don't even give any attention to that, because either we are having our rooms a lot illuminated, maybe TVs are there in the same bedroom, there can be a lot of light that is peeping inside from outside, right? I mean, the windows. But we don't keep any provide any attention to some of these things, and that is to be like really looked at. So it has to be a pitch dark kind of a room as far as possible. That helps in getting good sleep. And the other bad habit that people have developed, and somehow I find myself a lot fortunate not to, let's say, get into some of these very weird kind of habits, like, I mean, working out of your bed. because many people do that. I mean, they just get their laptop and then continue working from there. So you have to be creating that environment that this is where I come to for sleeping. Unless we basically create that dedicated and devoted kind of spaces, I think our minds can be in, let's say, a lot of confusing kind of a state. So we need to have a dedicated desk or maybe a dedicated place for work. And then when it comes to sleep, I think we should not be getting a lot of these things, not even, let's say, gadgets for watching movies or whatever other things, right? I mean, unless you are like blessed and can get to bed or maybe get to sleep real quick, you should refrain from having some of these habits as such. Very, very important, because many people do these kinds of mistakes. And I'm working with quite a few ladies, and again, blame it on the pandemic or whatever, blame it on their age, maybe beyond 50, but because there is no per se responsibility left, right? I mean, I'm not discounting their state, right? I mean, but that's a fact. And because I think that's the kind of state of life they're in, there's nothing to do, and they just consume meaningless this thing, I mean, content, and they don't even understand that they're doing it at the expense of their sleep. So we need to be having that particular understanding, a deeper understanding. Let's talk about the do's. So and these are also, I think, very, I would say, cliched. You might be already knowing about it, but let me still reiterate that. So yeah, I mean, this is habits and mindset is something that I speak very highly about, that I coach very highly about. And that's where if you can maintain a schedule for your sleep, I think that's the best thing. Because many times, see, this is also not a very good idea when people approach their mid 30s, 40s and beyond, because whatever that we can do, let's say till our 30s, mid 30s, our bodies and our hormones support that to a great extent. That does not mean that we basically can continue living that kind of a life. People want to live like always in their like 20s. I'm binging on whatever, I mean, things. So Friday evening जैसे चालू होता है तो people start like, I mean, overnight एक show मैंने खत्म कर दिया OTT का. So, but I don't think that is required, right? I mean, we can always catch up on some of those things after, let's say, over a period of time as such. So it does not mean that I follow a certain schedule between Monday to Thursday, but between Friday and Friday to Sunday, I follow a different kind of a sleep cycle. That doesn't work. That does not help. Again, I mean, everything is having some context attached to that. It might be working. Let's say some of our viewers in their 20s, they probably, and Arpita can still do that. Kunal and myself, probably we may not be able to do that. But I think this is for the general population, right? I mean, so, okay. Yeah, this is very important. Protein-rich meals at dinners. This is absolutely important. I think one thing that we alluded to was about a lot of repairing that happens during the sleep, right? So, and that's where you need a good amount of protein as part of your last meal as such. So that's very important to, because if you're not just the muscles, but every other tissue is getting the kind of fuel that is required to repair, that's where you can get into deep sleep, right? I mean, yeah. So adequate and timely hydration is something that I again mentioned earlier, that people have this a little weird habit of having a lot of water towards the end of the evening, and that's how they have to be getting up for nature's call, right? I mean, peeing a lot frequently during the night. That can be avoided. So a lot of water towards the end of the night, I think, can be avoided to a great extent. But at the same time, I think during the day, a lot of adequate hydration is very, very important. Quiet and dark, like pitch dark kind of bedrooms. Again, there can be a lot of noise, right? I mean, that may be entering or whatever. There can be a lot of small LEDs. It can be your laptop. It can be your different chargers. It can be, let's say, earbuds, you name it, right? I mean, there are so many different kind of gadgets and the LEDs. And the sleep experts that I'm referring to, they talk very highly about avoiding all those gadgets. In fact, if you can get into a gadget-free kind of a bedroom, that can even be the best thing that can happen. Moderate intensity workout is very important, because many people, because of an absolute lack of activity, they are not bound to get sleep. Because I get a very hard time working with some people, again, typically with some ladies, that they are not able to, and it's a vicious cycle. Because they're in a particular age bracket, they're probably in their menopausal state. Their like knees are already compromised. Number of different kinds of things, knee joints, right? I mean, and they're not able to work out. The back is compromised, whatever. So while they're having those kinds of compromised state, physiological state, they're also not doing good in terms of all these things, right? I mean, in terms of sleep. So that's where I think moderate intensity workout is very important. So, and for that, I think we need to like work backwards. Anyone who's listening to this, probably in their 30s, mid 30s, 40s, they need to make sure that they're getting into that consistent habit of working out. It need not be a very high intensity kind of a workout. It need not be hitting the gym and then lifting the weights all the time, if not possible. But otherwise, at least a good amount of body weight strength training is I mean, utna to banta hai, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Anything that I'm missing, Dev, Kunal? We are almost getting towards the end of this, but yeah.
One question I have is in the don't section, the first one is high carb and late night dinners.
Yeah.
So uh, late night dinners is self-explanatory, but doesn't carbs make you more sleep prone, right? Like if you have a high carb meal, that automatically makes people drowsy. So
It is. Yeah. So I think we are looking at maybe a long term as in, let's say during the night, right? What is going to happen? So it is essentially going to lead to excess glucose production, excess insulin spikes, and cortisol spikes. So that is something I think we need to arrest. And for that, I think short term, yeah, obviously, what you're saying is making absolute sense. Immediately, people might feel, let's say, sleepy. They might go to bed. But what happens during that particular night, their blood glucose levels and other hormones are not going to be flatline. There's going to be a lot of spikes, and because of that, it is going to be interfering with their sleep. Their I mean, there's going to be a lot of hormonal imbalance, right? I mean, and that's where even the next day it is going to be having the cascading effect. So that's where I think
so if somebody is having very little carbs throughout the day,
yeah.
would it be better to have that at the dinner or some other time? Like, let's just say I'm having 100 grams rice. So is it better to have it at dinner? Is it a better strategy for sleeping?
My usual see that's one thing. I mean, we can have a different kind of a conversation sometime, Dave, because there's a lot to learn from you as well. But the kind of population that I cater to in terms of trainees of my clients, like I said, I mean, they're like beyond 40s, 50s. Many of them are having a lot of predisposed conditions. So for them, I usually suggest to have an absolute low carb meal. Aapko agar, I mean, if you want to have carbohydrates, have it in the earlier part of the day. But please do not have those carbs in the later part of the day, evenings. I mean, it has to be like a lot less than maybe 40, 50 grams, not beyond that at all. So, and I've seen a great deal of difference in terms of their metabolics, great deal of difference in terms of sleep. Like I said, barring a few handful of individuals who have been having very weird kind of sleep patterns for last 4, 5 years post pandemic, they are the ones, and typically these are unfortunately the ladies. But other than that, I think every single individual basically starts getting an amazing quality of sleep after following some of the things that I mentioned. But what you're saying is, I mean, can work with people who are younger, who are like doing amazing sets of workouts and things like that. It might work for them. Yeah. Right. I hope I answered that.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, I mean, these are the experts that I was referring to. So the one on the left is I would say the biggest of the authority, Professor Matt Walker. You'll find him on YouTube and maybe a few other social media platforms. But there's a lot to learn in terms of sleep from this person. Same is the case with Sean Stevenson. So I usually go to these people when I want to understand about sleep more. There's one Professor Ravi Isola in the US. He's also having there are like not a lot of content that is available from this professor, but otherwise Matt Walker and Sean Stevenson, I think you'll get to find a good amount of this thing contained as such. This is very, I mean, just an important bit. March 13 is the World Sleep Day. I think we do celebrate a lot of different things. I think this is something that we can at least be aware of for the importance of sleep as such. And not the least is what we have been discussing, what I've been mentioning time and again is the circadian rhythm is follow the sun, right? I mean, so, and it's there in, I think, most of the faiths. I mean, this is not something new. So see, most of the things that we discuss, I never even try to give anyone a feel that there's something new that we are talking. It's not, right. I mean, a lot of these things have been existing there. I think we realized it differently than many other people, and we are trying to basically cascade that to the population. So because many people in this field talk like, I'm the one who's inventing this. No, absolutely not. You're not the one who's inventing. Already, everything including low carb is invented long back, right? 100 grams of carbs or whatever. Everything has been there for long. There's nothing that we are doing over here as net new. Important thing over here is like, follow the sun, right? So it's there in most of the faiths, like what we talk about. Sunset se pehle khana nahi hai. Sorry, my bad. Sunrise, before sunrise, you shouldn't be consuming food, and after sunset, you should not be consuming food. So your daytime is something where you should be doing maximum of stuff, including your work as well. And I think you should then look forward to retiring a little early in the day every single day, and then catch up your sleep maybe around 10:30, 11 at the max, and basically have a good amount of sleep between 11 to 5, 6, whatever that you can. But this is very, very important when it comes to, let's say, bringing a small bit of change in terms of our habits, and it's not very difficult. Let me tell you that most of the people that I work with, in bits and pieces, they correct themselves while they are at very senior levels. They are like whatever different levels, but whatever kind of occupations that they are in, but they bring some of these changes in, let's say, step by step manner. It's not very difficult as such. So I'll take a pause. I think I've covered everything that was required to be covered here. Any other questions? Any other thoughts?
If I may add some things from my
Yeah,
experience,
please. Yeah,
right? So on one slide you mentioned about 7 to 8 hours of sleep. That's like bang on. That's like kind of the golden number you can achieve. Because if you go beyond 8 hours, like 10 hours, that's also not going to help you. So 7 to 8 hours is perfect. And the timing for those maybe 8 hours of sleep, I say 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. is the time where you should be actually getting good sleep. If you're
yes,
kind of not sleeping in those hours and trying to cover up sleep in later hours, that's not going to help much. So that's kind of great. That 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. Window is a great window to get good sleep
right,
in.
true.
And then in terms of the routines, how to get into good sleep, I'll quote one person on Twitter, Dan Go. He kind
Yeah,
of gave a 3-to-1 rule, which is, I'll modify it and make it 4-3-2-1, which means 4 hours before going to your bed to sleep, don't do any strenuous physical activity. You can do light yoga, breathing, that's okay,
perfect.
but don't go to the gym, because that's going to keep you in a state of
Absolutely,
adrenaline and you will stay awake. So that's
absolutely.
4 hours before bed. Don't do any strenuous physical
Yes,
activity. Then 3 hours before bed, you don't have food, like have your dinner
perfect.
3 hours before bed. And then coming to 2 hours before bed, you should basically stop having any liquids, because then
Perfect.
you're going to go and
Correct.
take a break in the bathroom once you're sleeping.
Yeah,
And 1 hour before bed is going to be your blue screen, and all your screens you should shut off.
perfect.
So if you follow this 4-3-2-1 rule, try to
Yeah,
implement it, you're going to get good quality of sleep. The,
absolutely.
a couple of more things. The tube lights which we have just above our beds, the white
Yeah,
light. So those lights have blue light in it, and they're going to mess up the melatonin and
correct.
everything in our
Yeah,
hormones in our system. So when you're trying to go to sleep, just switch off those lights above you directly at least.
exactly. Yes,
And some people can actually put red bulbs
yes.
in their rooms, because the
Yeah,
red light kind of, when you see that in the evening the sun sets, the wavelength is towards the red light.
correct. Correct.
It signals our body a circadian clock that okay,
Yeah,
it's time to wind down.
yeah.
But if you keep artificial light on before bed, it's going to just mess up that signal. So you got to put like
Yes,
a red bulb, and it really helps. Another thing is, people who have problems sleeping, they can actually take a warm bath, because a warm bath will
true.
make, like put hot water, it's the
Yeah,
opposite inside. Your core body temperature goes up. That's
yep.
why in the evening, take a hot bath, and then your core body temperature becomes cold. It
Yeah,
goes
correct.
down, right? And
Correct.
that's why you need that well cooled room to sleep in,
Yes,
and complete blinders. It should be a dark room.
correct.
So these are the kind of tips which I have implemented in my routine, and I've seen great benefits getting good quality sleep with these
Yeah.
routines. So I just wanted to add that.
No, absolutely. This is really helpful. Thanks for adding, because yeah, I think somehow those were not covered in the presentation. But the
Two things.
important, sorry, the important thing is about thing. One other thing that I wanted to mention. I'm not too sure whether I'm yeah, I'm missing on that particular thread. But yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing. Anything else, Dev?
Yeah,
I'm
so two things I want to add is one is coffee. Like I consume a lot of coffee. So others like me stop coffee like as maximum 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. Nothing beyond that.
yeah,
It'll really mess up your sleep.
yes,
Another thing is invest in your the mattress and stuff. Like
yeah,
that's get a really comfortable one.
very true.
Yeah. So that is another point I want to say.
Yeah, yeah. Right. So, yeah, I think we covered everything. Thanks for, I think, adding some of these things, because I probably could not have covered that. But yeah, anything else? Any other questions? Any other queries? Otherwise, think.
I just want to say that this was really a great session on sleep, and there is so much, these are things which people actually know, but somehow people forget. So it's really
Yeah.
good that this presentation, when people watch, they'll be reminded of the simple things which can bring big improvements in their health. So I want to thank you, Yogesh, for presenting this.
Yeah. No, thanks. Thanks, Kunal and Dave, for the invite again. And then I'm looking forward to having some of these interesting conversations, right? I mean, there's a lot to basically know and understand from you as well. So one of the sessions, probably we can switch the roles, and then I'll get to learn quite a few things from you as well. But otherwise, thanks for your time. This was a great Sunday evening. Highly appreciated.
Thank you. And we'll just
Yeah.
end the podcast. So
Absolutely.
thanks everyone for tuning into the HealthyX Sundays podcast. Join us next week for another live podcast with a new guest. Until then, stay healthy, stay happy, and take care.